The night was relentless, wind howling, rain pounding, and darkness swallowing every corner of the bridge. It wasn't a place people passed through often, especially on a stormy night like this. Yet there they were, two figures locked in a struggle that would change lives forever. One, an elderly man, his voice trembling as he pleaded for mercy. The other was younger, silent, and unwavering, his grip tightened with every passing second. The rain poured down, masking the intensity of their confrontation from the world around them. How did it come to this? What could drive two men to a desolate bridge in a storm? One man, desperate to hold on to his life. The other, desperate to take it away. A sudden motion, a muffled scream, and then silence. The old man was gone, his body swallowed by the raging waters below. The younger man stood there, motionless, his breath heavy, his thoughts racing. In his mind, the deed was done. No witnesses, no evidence, just the sound of the storm to mask his crime. But he didn't see the boy, hidden in the shadows, clutching a phone with trembling hands. Alex, just 13 years old, had stumbled onto this moment by chance, but what he witnessed would haunt him for the rest of his life. He stood frozen, unsure of what to do. What could he do? Stay silent? Speak up? Could the truth he held in his hands change everything, or would it disappear, just like the man in the water? This is the story of one moment, one decision, and one unlikely witness who held the power to expose it all. Before we get into this story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for daily new stories. 3 lives, each shaped by different circumstances, each following a separate path, yet destined to collide on that bridge. The elderly man, Henry Caldwell, was a name known to many. A self-made millionaire, he had built his empire brick by brick through decades of relentless work and innovation. To the outside world, Henry was a figure of admiration, a philanthropist who funded scholarships, built community centers, and supported charities. He seemed larger than life, a symbol of success and generosity. But not everyone viewed Henry this way. Behind the accolades and public image was a man who had made difficult, sometimes ruthless decisions. He had downsized his company when profits fell, leaving hundreds jobless. He had outmaneuvered competitors, forcing them out of business. To some, he was a hero. To others, he was a man whose success came at the cost of others' suffering. Ethan Reeves, the younger man on the bridge, was one of those people. Once an ambitious employee at Caldwell's company, Ethan had dreamed of climbing the corporate ladder. But during one of Henry's infamous downsizing efforts, Ethan was let go without warning. For Henry, it was a necessary business decision. For Ethan, it was the beginning of his downfall. Over the years, Ethan struggled to rebuild his life. He fell into debt, relationships crumbled, and his bitterness grew. In his mind, Henry Caldwell wasn't just his former boss. He was the reason for everything that had gone wrong in his life. Then there was Alex, the boy who would change everything. At 13, Alex was curious and observant, always wandering to places others overlooked. That night, drawn by the storm, he had taken shelter near the bridge, seeking a moment of quiet in the chaos. He didn't know Henry or Ethan, didn't know their histories or the weight of their actions. But by the end of the night, Alex would find himself at the center of a story far bigger than he could have imagined. The storm raged on as Ethan Reeves tightened his grip on Henry Caldwell. The older man struggled, his hands shaking as he tried to free himself. Rain poured down in torrents, drenching them both, and making every movement more difficult. Henry's voice was barely audible above the howling wind. Henry pleading, "Ethan, stop this. You don't have to do this. We can talk. Whatever you think I've done, there's a better way to handle it." Ethan coldly said, "Talk? Do you want to talk now, after everything you've taken from me? You don't get to talk, Henry, not anymore." To Ethan, Henry's words were hollow. All he could see was the man who, in his mind, had stolen his future, the man who had thrown him away without a second thought. Ethan's grip tightened, his anger boiling over as Henry struggled to stay on his feet. The bridge, slick with rain, became a treacherous battleground. "Ethan, please, think about what you're doing. This isn't who you are," Henry desperately said. Ethan replied, "You don't know who I am, Henry. You never did, but you're about to find out." With one final shove, Ethan sent Henry over the edge. The older man's scream was brief, cut off by the roar of the river below. For a moment, Ethan stood there, breathing heavily, staring into the darkness where Henry had disappeared. The storm seemed to quiet for just a moment, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then, slowly, methodically, Ethan began to cover his tracks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Henry's watch, a symbol of the man's wealth and success. He hurled it into the river, watching it disappear into the churning waters. He adjusted his clothing, wiped his hands on his jacket, and rehearsed his alibi in his mind. A dinner with friends, a phone call at the time of the incident, anything to place him far from the bridge. This story is just getting started, but we want to hear from you. As you watch, think about what you would do if you held the key to justice in your hands. Would you act or stay silent? Comment below with your perspective. We're reading all your responses. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you're as captivated by Alex's courage as we are. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to you. Secrets, no matter how well hidden, have a way of unraveling. Ethan Reeves believed he was alone, his crime swallowed by the storm, but just beyond his sightline, in the shadows of the bridge, Alex stood rooted to the spot, his small frame pressed tightly against the cold steel railing. Rainwater dripped from his hood, soaking through his clothes, but he barely noticed. His wide eyes fixated on the scene before him, his breath shallow and uneven as his trembling hands clutched the phone. Alex hadn't come to the bridge expecting to see something so horrifying. It had started as an aimless walk, his way of escaping the tension at home, his parents arguing again, their voices rising and falling in a familiar but exhausting pattern. The storm had seemed like a perfect distraction, the kind of wild energy that mirrored the chaos in his mind. But as he approached the bridge, the faint silhouettes of two men caught his attention. He had stopped in his tracks, unsure of what he was seeing. At first it looked like an argument, a heated exchange, but as he moved closer, his heart began to race. Something was wrong. The moment Ethan shoved Henry Caldwell, Alex froze. His instincts had told him to run, to flee from the danger, but his feet refused to move. His fingers, however, acted without thought. Almost mechanically, he raised his phone and hit record, the screen glowing faintly in the darkness as the device captured everything. The struggle, the shove, the sound of the older man's scream as he disappeared into the river below. Alex's hands trembled so violently that he almost dropped the phone, but he tightened his grip, unwilling to lose the evidence. His fear was paralyzing, a cold weight in his chest, but somewhere deep down, he knew that what he was doing mattered. As Ethan stood over the edge of the bridge, scanning the waters below for any sign of his victim, Alex held his breath. He dared not even shift his weight for fear of making a sound. The rain was his only ally, its unrelenting downpour masking his presence. Yet every time Ethan turned his head, Alex's stomach tightened, convinced he would be discovered. He could see the tension in Ethan's movements, the deliberate way he adjusted his clothing and tossed the stolen watch into the river. It was clear that Ethan thought he had erased all evidence of his crime. But Alex's phone told a different story. As Ethan began walking away, his footsteps fading into the storm, Alex's mind raced. His body wanted to collapse, to release the tension that had gripped him so tightly, but his thoughts wouldn't let him. He replayed the scene in his head over and over, each detail seared into his memory. The older man's pleas for mercy, the final shove, the moment his body vanished into the churning waters below. Alex blinked back tears, his fear now mixed with a profound sense of responsibility. He had captured something terrible, something that could change everything. But what was he supposed to do now? He glanced at his phone, the screen still wet with raindrops. The video paused on a frozen frame of the two men locked in their final moments. His chest tightened as he considered his options. Should he show someone? Would they believe him? And what if Ethan found out he was there? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Alex knew that coming forward meant taking a risk he wasn't sure he was brave enough to take. For what felt like an eternity, Alex stood on the bridge, unmoving, his thoughts spiraling. He imagined confronting the police, showing them the video, and having to relive the terror of what he had seen. He imagined Ethan finding him, discovering the recording, and what might happen if he did. Yet, amidst the fear, another thought began to surface. What about the man who had been thrown into the river? What about Henry Caldwell? Did anyone even know what had happened to him? Was there anyone else who could speak for him now? The rain began to ease, and the storm's roar softened into a steady patter. Alex finally exhaled, the tension in his chest releasing just enough for him to take a shaky step backward. He glanced around, ensuring that Ethan was truly gone before lowering the phone and tucking it into his jacket. His hands were still trembling, his legs unsteady, but he forced himself to move. Step by step, he retreated into the darkness, leaving the bridge behind, but carrying the weight of what he had witnessed. That night, Alex couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Henry falling into the river, his final cry echoing in his ears. The video was proof, undeniable and clear, yet Alex couldn't bring himself to watch it again. He left the phone on his bedside table, its screen turned off, as though ignoring it could make the memory go away, but the weight of the truth remained, pressing down on him with every passing hour. In the days that followed, Alex avoided the bridge, avoided the news, and avoided anyone who might ask him why he seemed so withdrawn. But the video on his phone was a constant reminder. He couldn't bring himself to delete it, even though part of him wanted to erase the entire experience. Somewhere deep inside, Alex knew that he couldn't stay silent forever. The truth was too big, too important to keep hidden. Yet the fear of what might happen next kept him paralyzed. Alex's world had changed in an instant. He had gone to the bridge looking for escape, for a brief moment of solitude. Instead, he had become the sole witness to a crime, a witness whose silence could mean letting a murderer walk free. The choice before him was daunting, and for now, Alex could only hold on to the hope that he would find the courage to do what he knew was right. The hours after the crime stretched into an agonizing eternity for Alex. Alone in his room, he sat in silence, unable to shake the image of Henry Caldwell disappearing into the violent waters below. The sound of the storm still echoed in his ears, as did the terrified cry Henry had made just before the end. Alex had witnessed something no one should ever have to see, let alone carry the burden of at such a young age. The phone lay on his desk, untouched since he had placed it there after returning from the bridge. Its screen was black, but Alex knew what it contained, the video that had captured every horrifying detail of that night. He couldn't bring himself to open it again, yet he couldn't erase it either. He knew that what he held could change everything, but the weight of responsibility made him feel paralyzed. Fear clouded his thoughts. Would anyone believe him? Could he trust anyone to understand the truth? And most terrifying of all, what if Ethan found out? The next day, Alex found it nearly impossible to focus. At school, his teachers noticed his distant gaze, his distracted answers to questions, and his uncharacteristically quiet demeanor. He kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone, afraid that someone might see through him and uncover the turmoil he was hiding. The secret he carried made the world feel heavier, and every passing moment seemed to remind him of what he hadn't done, what he couldn't bring himself to do. That evening, Alex tried to sit with his parents during dinner, but his appetite had vanished. He stared at his plate, pushing food around with his fork, while his mother and father exchanged worried glances. When they asked him what was wrong, he shook his head and mumbled a quick excuse about being tired. He wanted to tell them, to let them shoulder some of the burden, but every time he tried to speak, the words caught in his throat. What if they didn't believe him? Worse, what if they dismissed it entirely? The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. Alex began waking up in the middle of the night, his heart pounding as though he were still standing on that bridge. He would sit upright in his bed, gasping for air, the shadows of his room pressing in on him. He would glance at the phone on his desk, the silent witness to everything he had seen, and wonder if he dared to do what was right. It wasn't until nearly a week after the crime that Alex finally decided he couldn't carry the weight alone any longer. He thought about Henry Caldwell's family, people who might be waiting for answers, people who deserved to know the truth about what had happened. He thought about the possibility of Ethan walking free, his crime buried by the storm, and the idea filled Alex with a pang of guilt that made his stomach churn. He had to act, even if it terrified him. The only person Alex felt he could trust was his history teacher, Miss Carter. She had always been patient and kind, someone who listened without judgment. After class one day, Alex hesitated by her desk, clutching his phone tightly in his hand. She looked up and smiled gently, noticing his nervousness. "Is everything okay, Alex?" she asked, her voice steady and calm. It was all the encouragement Alex needed to let the words spill out. Through trembling lips, Alex told her everything. He described the storm, the struggle on the bridge, and the terrifying moment when Henry had been pushed into the river. When he finished speaking, he showed her the video, his hands shaking as he pressed play. Miss Carter watched in silence, her expression growing more serious with every passing second. When the video ended, she placed a reassuring hand on Alex's shoulder. "You've done the right thing by telling me," she said firmly. "This is something we need to take to the authorities." Miss Carter immediately contacted the police, explaining the situation and arranging for Alex to share the recording. The officers who reviewed the footage were stunned by its clarity. It captured every critical detail: the confrontation, Ethan's cold determination, and the moment Henry Caldwell was forced into the raging waters. One officer, shaking his head, said, "This is exactly what we need to bring the truth to light." For Alex, hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off his chest. He had done what was right, even though it had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. The investigation moved quickly, with the video serving as the centerpiece of the case against Ethan Reeves. Investigators began unraveling his carefully constructed alibi, exposing inconsistencies in his story. Witnesses contradicted his claims of being elsewhere that night, and forensic evidence from the bridge further tied him to the crime. With Alex's video, the prosecution had an undeniable account of what had happened, and the case against Ethan became ironclad. The trial captured widespread attention. News outlets ran headlines about the shocking crime, the fall of a self-made millionaire, and the courage of a young boy who refused to let the truth stay hidden. In court, Ethan's defense team tried to portray him as a man driven to desperation, someone who had reached his breaking point after years of hardship. But the video told a different story, a deliberate act of violence, calculated and cold. The jury watched the footage in silence, their expressions grim as they absorbed the evidence. The prosecution painted a clear picture of Ethan's motives, a man consumed by bitterness and anger, seeking revenge against someone he blamed for all his failures. It took the jury only a few hours to deliver their verdict: guilty. Ethan Reeves was sentenced to life in prison, his crime exposed by the quiet bravery of a boy who refused to look away. For Alex, the aftermath was complicated. While the community praised him as a hero, he struggled to reconcile his emotions. He had done the right thing, but the memory of that night stayed with him, haunting his thoughts. Miss Carter continued to support him, reminding him that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act despite it. In the end, Alex's story became a testament to the power of truth and the importance of standing up for justice. It reminded everyone that even in the darkest moments, the smallest voice can make a difference. This story isn't just about a crime, it's about choices, courage, and the power of doing what's right. Now, we want to hear from you. What's your point of view on Alex's decision? Comment below. We're eager to hear your take. And before you go, hit that like button to show your support for stories that matter. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chance to reflect, learn, and engage with more thought-provoking content. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.